Here on The Colour of Country Life, great to be speaking with the National Party leader and Shadow Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud. How are you, David?
Yeah, good. Good to be with you, mate.
Not a problem at all. Look, we picked up on your commentary. You've said this a few times post the recent election about nuclear energy. What's the push that you're seeking to make? Is it more or less the National Party's trying to raise the agenda on this issue?
We are. And look, we appreciate that the Liberal Party and the Labor Party aren't quite there yet. And many say, well, why didn't you do it when you were in government? Well, the Liberal Party wasn't with us. We were in coalition, but the National Party has a long-standing view that we need to explore emerging technology in the nuclear space. We're not talking about big nuclear power plants. We're talking about the emerging technology of small-scale modular. And that's not tomorrow. And that's probably not in 5 years. It's probably in 5 to 10 years as we sit back, watch and see what this technology can do. And in terms of the cost as well, in terms of the reliability and reducing emissions. So until then, we have a technology agnostic approach to reducing emissions. We're not against renewables, but we're just saying renewables technology isn't there yet either in terms of batteries, not necessarily just for homes, but also more importantly for industry who employ people. So if they don't have confidence and we make a quick path towards renewables without being able to provide baseload reliable, affordable power, then they don't employ people. So we just got to be careful on this, and all we're saying is let's just have a conversation. I wrote to the Prime Minister in June and said that why don't we have a National Energy Summit and political leaders put all our predispositions aside and have a mature conversation. We should lead the country in being able to understand the possibilities of nuclear. We're going to spend billions of dollars on hydrogen, yet that it's untested, yet we're closing our mind to the emerging technology of small-scale modular that's safer and it's cheaper. If that's the case, well and be. If it's not, well, all the Nats are saying, let's run the ruler over these. Let's not predispose our position and say no. And I think that's what the electorate want. They're a jack of us yelling at one another. And instead, they want us to show some political leadership. And the new Prime Minister said that on election night. He said he wanted to create a new political construct. Well, here's your chance. I've invited him to come back. I haven't heard from him. It's nearly a month since I wrote that letter to him. And hopefully when he gets back from overseas, he'll give it some strong consideration, because I think there's an appetite in the community for leadership and for a mature conversation about our energy mix.
I've heard it said before that because of the ban that exists at federal law on nuclear energy being a form of energy generation, that investors aren't interested in really talking or putting forward proposals in Australia. Is that sort of part of what you'd have to put on the agenda, is having also a legally agnostic approach towards nuclear energy?
Well, that's right, but you've got to educate before you legislate, and we've got to make sure that there's a consensus in the community that this is something we want to explore. And the time when that legislation was put into Act was really a point in history where the only thing we could measure it against were incidents of things like Chernobyl that was using 1960s technology. And effectively what we're saying is the world's moved on, technology's moved on. Australia shouldn't stand back and turn its back on an opportunity that may be there. And if it's not, that's okay. We're not trying to throw this down anyone's throat. But we'd be keen to explore the changing of any legislation. But before you do that, you've got to have a bipartisan approach to it, and that takes national leadership. And that's what the National Party wants to do. We're not trying to do anything other than provide national leadership and say, let's work together. And I think that's what the Australian public want, particularly since we came out of COVID-19 and all the screaming and yelling between premiers and federal governments. I think they just want some maturity of this, and this is a very important topic considering the crisis we've gone through over the last couple of months, that this is an opportunity for us to reset and recast the narrative and make sure we do it in a respective way.
Well, as there's this race towards sort of net zero when it comes to carbon emissions, I'm noticing even in California, for instance, there's a fight from those that generally would have seen this as more on the left of politics to say, well, let's keep our nuclear plant open. Are we seeing this sort of breaking of ranks within the climate change movement of people now starting to say, look, we need to start talking about nuclear as a way of getting to net zero?
Yeah, because this is all about dispatchability. It's about having baseload power. And what the new government is saying is let's just put all our eggs into the renewables basket. And I've got nothing against renewables. All I'm saying is that it's an unproven technology in terms of large-scale dispatchable power. The technology and physics aren't quite there, and we're going to have to spend billions of dollars on that to be able to provide it. but does it still provide us at the end of it the baseload dispatchable power to give investment confidence to business? And that's a conversation we should maturely have as a nation. It may. And I'm not against that, but I'm just saying this is an opportunity not to put all our eggs in one basket, to spread the risk, to look at other options. And that's what our whole plan was to start with as a coalition government, was not to pick a winner, but to actually have a mixture so that we had coverage when one industry could provide it and another couldn't. And when the prices went up, or it gave us the ability to be flexible but provide that baseload sustainable power that we all need at an affordable rate while reducing our emissions. That's all I'm trying to achieve. And that's why we're saying let's have the conversation, even looking at existing energy sources like coal and gas, but using things like carbon capture storage, where even in my own electorate, a coal-fired power station there is undertaking a pilot and has drilled a hole to store the carbon from the power station. So if we get back to first principles of reduce emissions, well, you can look at all the energy mixes. How do we do it a cheap, affordable way that gives us the reliability we want while reducing emissions? That's the question that needs to be answered, and we shouldn't be religious in our beliefs of how that should be done. I'm saying run the ruler over all of them and let the Australian people decide, because invariably they'll get it right.
Now, you mentioned the Prime Minister has been overseas of late. There's a chance he might be over at the Pacific Islands Forum soon. That's been discussed with your the Minister, Murray Watt, and yourself previously here on Flow about whether the Pacific is going to be enough for our agricultural labour needs. Do you think that we need to put that in the spotlight about the ag visa with that currently on the rocks under Labor?
Well, they're canning it. And what they're doing is going to drive up prices at the checkout. Every time you get that docket for your fresh fruit and veggies and your meat, you should see Anthony Albanese's face in it, because what he's saying is he's prepared to fast-track visas for the construction industry, for the health industry, a whole range of industries across the economy, which we support. But for agriculture, he's limiting our availability just the Pacific scheme. We've already brought in tens of thousands through the Pacific schemes. But what the ag visa did was not just go to unskilled workers. It went to skilled and semi-skilled workers as well. So he's taken that away. And the farming sector is already saying we can't take too much more of the Pacific scheme. We've sort of taken as much as we can, and we're sharing that with other industries as well. But we need industry-specific skills that we can get from these other countries. And so for some reason, because these political masters of the AW said you can't have an ag visa, and I don't know why the AW's got a bent against agriculture and particularly farming families. They went in and said to ambassadors and embassies, and said, do not send your citizens here because they will be exploited by farming families. That is nonsense. There is a small cohort in industry that does the wrong thing. But it's not rampant in every farmer that's exploiting foreign workers. And who does that to a fellow Australian? Like, you don't go and sabotage their reputation internationally, Australian farmers, but our whole nation's reputation internationally. So the unions and the Labor Party got to stop, got to think and understand that if farmers don't have the tools, they don't have the workers, then they make investment decisions not to plant. And they don't plant if they can't pick it. And the problem we've got is they're making investment decisions not to plant. And in fact, the prices at the moment, because of floods, but they're not replanting all their crops. In fact, some farm groups are estimating it down to about 65% of what they're replanting because they don't have the confidence they're going to have their labour at the end of it. And so that means that this high prices you're seeing at the supermarket at the moment are going to last. And they're going to stay up because the supply of the product goes down, which means your price goes up. And so every time you're at that checkout, you should just think of Anthony Albanese's name on it, because he's not empowering farmers to be able to do their best. And he's telling the rest of the world that we're going to feed them, yet he won't give them the tools to do it. And this is the sort of stuff that just comes back to common sense. And he's got to listen to farmers, not unions. And we will have solutions that will continue to drive Australian agriculture.
Well, Minister Watt said critics of the AWU hadn't come up with any evidence that the union movement had been downplaying the ag visa at embassies. Is there some examples of that, or a way we can tease that out in the Parliament?
Daniel Walton has in fact actually publicly acknowledged he went and spoke to ambassadors, and in fact has said that he will continue to do it. He's on the public record. So Murray Watt needs to continue to be, I know he's a CFMEU sort of guy, but he's got to reach out and talk to Daniel Walton, because Daniel Walton's on the public record saying he did it. And in fact, journalists in the gallery has confirmed it with embassies down here that he has done it. And this is the abhorrent nature of the union movement, and a window into what your new government is going to be run by. It's going to be run by union hacks. they're going to be telling us, they're going to be telling farmers what to plant, where to plant it, how to do it. And this is the thing that everyone needs to understand is that you mightn't think that's a big problem living in the city, but you're going to pay the bill at the checkout because your costs are going up and they're going to stay up. And so Daniel Walton is gloating about the fact that he's gone and seen these embassies and ambassadors. And I've actually had ambassadors in my office telling me that they've been there. So, Murray Watt needs to start to listen to some farmers rather than the union movement.
All right, just wanted to touch base with you. We talked, and really foot and mouth disease was probably front of mind. Last we talked about biosecurity and this levy that you had sort of delayed implementation, but the ball was rolling on it. Now we've got this varroa mite concern regarding the bee industry, which is another serious concern. Do we need to just get on with having that levy on imports, given that it's probable that the shipping containers might have been where these bees have come from?
Yeah, and this is going to a cost recovery model. And the reason we didn't rush into it before was because of COVID, and a lot of these industries would have fallen over. But now we're back up on our feet. Before the election, the department had done a lot of consultation with industry about a cost recovery model, who posed the highest risks to our biosecurity, therefore who should pay greater costs for that. And so that consultation should be complete now, and now it's just a matter of basically the government moving forward in putting in this cost recovery model so that our biosecurity systems are paid for. But we were paying for them before that. So there was an extra $1.1 billion worth of biosecurity export support that we put in over the last 3 budgets, which were over a span of about 24 months. And the fact that we are finding a lot of these incursions means that because we've got more detection on the ground, and we're going to continue to find that, but we need to make sure that we don't have this ad hoc funding. That's what we were moving to, but we did it responsibly, made sure that any dollar that biosecurity needed, they got. But now we'll go to a cost recovery model, and the ball's now in the new government's court just to finalise it and to implement this, and to implement this very quickly.
Yeah, well, in the end, the varroa mite situation, whilst people might think it's just about bees and apiarists, it's actually about pollination as well. It could wipe out as many as 90% of the bee population in Australia. Yeah,
and so you've got to appreciate 65% of agricultural production relies on bee pollination. So the bee industry itself is about $100 million just in honey. But the pollination equates to about $14.2 billion worth of Australian agricultural production. So, they're the unheralded heroes of Australian agriculture, our APRIS. And I don't think too many people understand. We think about traditional agriculture as beef and grain, but this is the real guts of it, is our APRIS. They are the most pivotal part of Australian agriculture we've got. And I think this has shone in the spotlight, unfortunately for the wrong reasons, but it's a real wake-up call that the bee industry is probably one of the most important agricultural industries we have in this country.
David Littleproud, National Party leader, thank you very much for joining us today on Flow. Have us a great weekend.
You too, mate. Thanks for having me.